If you detect an accent, I was born in France in 1948, so that tells you my age right there. I'm 75, 77. Yeah, 77. Um, I was born in the northern part of France, and that's quite a story because my father was British and my mother was French, but my father was a Belgian citizen. So go figure. An Englishman who's a Belgian citizen who marries a French woman and then produces this international European. So that's my accent. I've lost a lot of it. I was married for 52 years to a Kentuckian, and if that'll knock any accent out of you. You knew Marie, didn't you? A wonderful Christian lady. Um, so, when I was 4 years old, something really amazing happened. And to tell you what happened at my age, 4 years old, I got to back up the story a little bit. As all your viewers would be aware of, Germany invaded Belgium twice. Once in World War I, and they were defeated. And in an ignominious defeat, and as a result, when Hitler came to power, he stirred them up, and lo and behold, they created an even greater World War, World War II. Well, they invaded Belgium, and my father was a Belgian who had been born in England. That's a different story I won't get into. But Dad was in Belgium when the Germans invaded, and they were recruiting Belgian boys to be soldiers in the German army. Dad did not want to fight for the Germans, and so he went in hiding. The Germans came and got his father and said, we're going to make a soldier out of you if your son doesn't turn himself in. So Dad turned himself in, and the commandant, I'm just telling what I have heard from both my parents, so I can't vouch I wasn't there. My father turned himself in, and the commandant said, you're going to be executed. Well, Dad was dating this French girl from across the border in France, and my mom, Julienne Castelein, volunteered, "Sir, I will go with him as into a work camp, not a concentration camp, but a work camp. I will volunteer to go with Don if you'll let him live." And the commandant said yes. And so Mom and Dad in 1945, 44, 45, they actually went and worked in Germany in a work camp. After about 9 months of working there, they were given the opportunity to return home, and then they had to come back to Germany. They went home but never returned. And by the time that they had arrived in France, where my grandparents were living, that part of the country had been liberated by the Americans. And there was a very special American that some of your viewers may recognize the name of. You will, Todd. I'm sure you will. This American was a mess sergeant. In other words, he worked in the kitchen detail. And he needed someone who could speak English, someone who could speak French. Dad was married to a French woman. Someone who could speak Dutch. Dad was Flemish, Belgian, in Flanders Fields. In fact, that's right where he was raised. And someone who could speak German. Dad spoke all four languages fluently. And so he volunteered to serve for the American Armed Forces. And the mess sergeant who was looking for help was a guy named Don Sharp. That ring a bell? Because he at one time preached here in Lincoln, Illinois. They became very good friends. I'll probably get choked up when I tell this story. I regularly do, because it reminds me of God's grace and goodness in my life. The two Dons became good friends. Don Sharp returned to America, and Don Castelein said, "I'll write you and you write me." Don wrote a letter, and it got returned in Virginia, where he was living at the time, and it said address inconnu, unknown address, which is odd because I've seen the letter. It had the right address on it, but it was returned in 1945. My dad did the typical Castelein thing. He lost the letter. So he could not contact his American friend after the war. His American friend didn't have any way of contacting him. So 1946, 1947, 1948, 1949. Finally, in 1951, my mom was messing with a drawer that was stuck and yanked it open, and out pops the address of Don Sharp, this American friend. So my dad, who writes English, speaks English. His mother is a British lady. He learned English from his mom. He writes and says, "If you're still living, write me," which is a very logical thing to say. But Merry Christmas. And Don Sharp, and I've heard him. He's a very good friend of mine. I ministered with him. He says that letter just made his Christmas that year. So he immediately wrote back and said, "Yes, I'm living. I'm in school. I'm studying for the ministry." He had become a Christian. During the war, Don Sharp was not a Christian. So in the meantime, from 1945 to 1951, Don Sharp had become a Christian and was now at Johnson Bible College studying for ministry. Isn't that amazing? So Don Sharp took Don Castelein's letter to a missions group. Students had a missions group on campus and said, "I've got this Belgian friend. He lives in France, but we need to pray for him." Not only did they pray for my dad and mom, but they decided that to really have a witness with this Belgian guy, they needed to send Don Sharp to France to witness to my dad. And they collected the money, and they sent Don Sharp and a guy named Elliot Massey on the Queen Mary, I think. There's the Queen Elizabeth and the Queen Mary. I get it mixed up. But I think I'm pretty sure it was the Queen Mary. And they witnessed to the people on board, and they baptized some people on board of the ship in the swimming pool. So they were loaded for bear when they got to Alouin, France, the northern part of France. So they witnessed to my folks. Mom did not understand English very well. Dad translated it for her every evening. And after about a week, my dad said, "You know what? I've heard Don Sharp tell this many a time, and it's been written up, the story about the two Dons." Don Sharp says, "We were in Acts 8 with the Ethiopian eunuch." And the Ethiopian says, "What hinders me from being baptized?" And my dad turned that on Don Sharp and says, "What's keeping me from being baptized?" And Don said, "Nothing, if you believe." So I've seen the pictures. I still have them in my folder in files. They're little squared off pictures. But Dad and Mom were baptized in the goldfish pond downtown Alouin. Yeah, it is awesome. So Dad was so excited about becoming a Christian that he enrolled at Johnson Bible College. He had not finished high school, so he had to do a GED. And he actually did it very well in college. He graduated first of his class in 1956. So we left for America in 1952, and that's where I started telling this story. I was 4 years old, and my parents were converted. And we went to Johnson and lived on campus there. And in 1948, my dad decided that although he had opportunities to become a preacher in America, he wanted to preach to the Belgian people. And so he raised the missionary support, and we went to Genk, Belgium, Genk. It's a place that was open to Protestants in a very Catholic country. At that time, Belgium was, my guess is 95% Roman Catholic. Yeah. And they started a church there, and eventually it became the Kerk van Christus, Church of Christ, Kerk van Christus. And that was where I was baptized. I was my dad's first convert at age 8. Yeah. Now, I need to explain something a little bit about Belgium. And this is true of a lot of European countries. Even though religion is mandatory in school, so in this Athenaeum where I went to school, religion was mandatory. The kids would meet, I think once or twice a week, I'm not sure, with a priest. But I was not a Roman Catholic, so I went to a Protestant meeting. And I had two different domines. That's what they call a preacher, a domine. I had two different domines come and teach. And, I spoke Dutch and Flemish, and that's my native tongue, really. So here I was, Dad's first baptizee. But in my school, it was very secular. Even though they had mandatory religion in school, including Protestants, it was very secular. And the professors I respected the most were, they if they were Christians, they did not let on. And basically, I was getting a very secular education. So by the age of 14, I had come to a decision. This church stuff is for devout, simple, uneducated people, because that's what we had in our church, older people. And I stepped away from the faith at around age 14, 15. And that was the first of 3 different times I'm going to be telling you about that I walked away from the Lord. That one was an immature decision. I just was, I was a rebellious kid. I was raised very conservative. We were not allowed to television. We were not allowed to go to dancing. We were not allowed to do a lot of things. And the culture around me was very secular and very promiscuous. And so I rebelled against the faith, although I was taping my dad's worship services and church and taking them to people. I was involved in, but my heart was not in it. And then in 1965, something dramatic happened. And my dad had had some heart problems. And in 1965, in May of 1965, he had died very suddenly, unexpectedly. He knew he had heart problems, but we thought he was being taken care of, but he died of a heart attack. And that was traumatic for me, my brother and sister, Don, Linda, me, and Mom, Julianne Castelein. And that was the first time that I thought, I can't continue living like this. Because I was well on my way into a secular, non-Christian lifestyle. And so I remember vividly, and I've told this story many a time because the story of how what the Lord did to me that night, that evening, I enjoyed sharing it, and I'm going to share it briefly here, not at length. But I woke up and I went downstairs and I thought something's not right. And so there's a Bible there, my Bible actually, but I had not been reading it or praying, forced to go to church. And I opened it and it fell open to, as I recall, it fell open to Matthew 14. And I started reading around verse 22 about Peter walking on the water. And that story just gripped me because I knew that's exactly what I had done. I was in the boat and the storms, the winds of unbelief and all that, and, all the things that a young man is excited about, that was all blowing against me. And yet I felt the Lord was calling me. Just like, Peter, come out of the boat. And I remember vividly saying, Lord, if you're calling me, I'm coming. And I rededicated my life to the Lord. And at that time, America decided that our church needed a preacher. By the way, this is just a little side note, and the people here in Lincoln, Illinois, know Don Sharp because he preached here. The congregation invited Don Sharp to come and preach my father's funeral service, his good buddy, and they wanted him to stay, but he had just started a ministry in Crawfordsville, Indiana, so he couldn't come to Belgium. So I have this experience with the Lord, him calling me and me saying yes. And at that time, and that's where I started this whole side thing, Don Sharp was not going to stay, so they needed someone else to carry on the ministry. And there was a Louisiana Cajun, a Christian, and some people would recognize the name Milton Duhan. And he spoke French. The school, Johnson Bible College, where our missions board was, the forwarding agents, they were advised, do not send a Frenchman. Belgium is divided between Dutch-speaking people, Flemish, Vlaams, and French-speaking people, Walloons. And the country is seriously divided, always has been. Brussels lies right in the middle. And we told America, don't send a Frenchman. They did. So that caused problems. I started translating him. He did not speak Dutch. So as soon as I was back in the Lord, I was doing ministry. Every Sunday I was in the pulpit translating Milton. And then I got accepted at Johnson Bible College myself as a student. So in 1966, just having graduated from the Athenaeum, from the Belgian high school, I came to America as a student at Johnson Bible College. After 2 years, my mom had the falling out with Johnson Bible College. And it was because they had taken all our support, our mission support, and given it to the Duhan family. And I understand that. He was the missionary. He was doing the Bible studies and the preaching and all that. But my family had no income. And my mom was upset about that. She was able to raise and do missionary work and speaking in ladies' groups and all that. She supported our family, but it was tough. It was hard. And I'm going to say it in a way I didn't used to say this in the past, but just to cut to the story here, cut to the chase, she kidnapped me off of Johnson Bible College's campus because she said, you can't stay here. You got to go back to Belgium with me. And I was crestfallen. I had a girlfriend at Johnson. I had done well my sophomore year. I was catching on to English, and I was a good student. I looked forward to my junior year, and here, Mom said, nope, you're going back to Belgium or to some other school. Well, I had just heard from a guy who was new that semester. We'd become friends, and he had just transferred from a place called Lincoln, Illinois. He had been a student in Lincoln Christian College. And I told my mom, I said, I've heard about this school. It's one of our Christian schools. If you'll let me go there, I will leave Johnson. And she said, good enough. So I came to Lincoln, was taken in by John and Edith Webb. Does that name ring a bell? Yeah. He was the dean at one time of the undergraduate school. Very fine Christian people. He preached here on Route 66, 55. And I transferred, and one of my very first classes that I had that junior year changed my life. It was with a professor named James Strauss. And that name would ring a bell with a lot of people. And you heard that, he he. I'm trying to think. He would still have been alive when you came on campus, wouldn't he? No, he died in '92. No, wait a moment. He was incapacitated. He was no longer full time teaching, but he hung around campus from '92 on. So you may, I don't know what year Dr. Strauss died, but he had a big impact on a lot of students, including me. And so I was a student. I had good ministries. I got my MA. I got my MDiv. I married in 1968 a wonderful lady named Marie. And let me see, where do I want to go with this story from there? Well, in 1974, I had several churches saying, we'd like you to come and be our preacher. And I had to decide if I could do that. And I felt the Lord was saying, no, you need to check out your hometown in Genk, Belgium, and see if you can work with that church. So my wife and I, she spoke no Dutch, and I worked in the public school system for an income, and also had some mission support and preached at that church for about a year and a half. But my wife was losing a lot of weight. She had a hard time adjusting to the Belgian culture, and we both agreed we need to be back in America. So I came back to America, and when I got back, I had a really wonderful church open up to me in Streator, Illinois, Central Church of Christ. And the first year that I was there, the school contacted me and said, John, would you come and be one of our teachers in the college? And I said, I can't. I just started a ministry here. Well, the guy that they hired quit after a year. So Rondell Smith, that's a name that some people would know around here, he contacted me again and said, we really want you to come and be a teacher at Lincoln Christian College. And I said yes. So in 1978, I moved here with my wife, lived on campus, and started teaching in the New Testament department. So, here's a French-born guy who has a speech impediment. He cannot roll his R's, so he refuses to speak French. I had a real aversion to speaking French because I cannot roll my R's. I was tongue-tied as a child. And so here's someone who can't even speak his native tongue, who has grown up speaking Dutch, and now he's teaching in English. The Lord has a wonderful sense of humor. So the school asked me, they said, we would like you to pursue a doctor's degree. And you can go wherever you want. We will support you. So I got accepted at the #1 theology school at that time in America. By God's grace, I don't know how it happened, but I was accepted at the University of Chicago. And that was thanks to European professors that they were bringing in. They were rated #1 at that time in theology, above Harvard, Yale, Princeton. Isn't that amazing? They are not now. They're about 10th or 12th in the nation. But at that time, they were ranked #1. Hans Kuhn was there. Paul Ricoeur was there. I had a class with him. And they are top European names, and they were teaching there. So that was a tremendous privilege. And by the grace of God, by my chinny chin chin, I got my PhD from the University of Chicago. And in 1988, I think that's right. My memory's playing tricks on me, but I had my PhD. And at that time, right, in 1990, Dr. Strauss had a serious stroke or heart attack or something. But I remember visiting him in Springfield, Memorial in Springfield, and he was laying on a slab with just a sheet over him, and they had shocked him, his brain, his heart actually. They had shocked it over 30 times to keep him alive. I didn't know you could do that often, but they were doing everything they could to keep Dr. Strauss alive. So he survived, and when he came to the school, Wayne Shaw, who was the dean at that time, asked me, could you come and teach in the seminary and teach with Jim in the audience so that he can get full retirement? And I said I would. So I taught from 77 to 1990 in the college, and from 1990 on till 2014, I taught in the seminary. So that's just background story. That's interesting. Now, back to what I'm really talking about is the Lord's goodness to me and bringing me back to the faith, because maybe it's my European upbringing. Maybe it's just the way my mind works, but critical questions about the Bible and about prophecy and about miracles and about virgins having babies and about there being a God and answering prayer and the resurrection, all those questions I have lived with and struggled with all my life. I was very careful not to let it filter into my classes while I was teaching. But I had the top education at the University of Chicago. Just to get into the program, reading 50 of the most demanding scholarly works just to get into the program, and then another 50 books just to get out of the program, let alone the exams and the dissertation and all that. So I tried not to be a hypocrite and live two different worlds, but inwardly a real turmoil was brewing. I had all these questions, and I couldn't find satisfactory answers to them. So in 2014, when I retired with tremendous honors, the school knew I was struggling. I had one or two sermons where I actually told the seminary students, I'm struggling with this. And then I had weekly groups meetings with students where we talked honestly about doubt and faith and struggles. But in 2014, in my mind, I came out and I said, this is it. I'm done with the faith. These questions, Sunday school does not give answers to this, and even the pulpits don't give answers to these. But I'm reading, at that time, the four guys were coming out, with their Daniel Dennett and Sam Harris. Those are two of them. They were defenders of atheism. And so I left the faith. I still attended. I did not partake of communion. We quit giving. My wife had her own reasons separate from mine. Hers weren't intellectual or theological. She had her own problems with the church. But we attended. I still attended the Sunday school class, but I was out of it. And I had resolved I'm never preaching again. And I've kept that resolve. So 2014, I retire with full honors, with a distinguished professor award that no living professor had ever received. Dr. Henderson had received it, but after his passing, I was granted that distinguished professor award, and as it turns out now, the only time the school's ever done that, because the school's closed now. But so the school was very, very kind to me, but in all integrity, I could no longer be a teacher or a preacher or even really a Christian. And then something happened. That was leading up to the spring of 2014. The summer was, totally away from the church and all that. But in the fall of 2014, I had to have bypass surgery, double bypass surgery for my heart. I've always had heart problems like my dad. And Caleb, the strange thing is, when I came out of that surgery, I had this overwhelming feeling of gratitude toward God. It was very, very pronounced. It wasn't apologetics. It wasn't an argument. It was just this feeling, God, you have saved my life. And so I resolved, Okay, I have never done devotions in my life. My parents did not do devotions. They'd been raised without the church. They didn't know how to do devotions. We prayed at meals. That's about all the Christianity that we had. So I did not have a heritage of being devotional, of praying, of Bible reading. I read Bible for preaching, but I didn't do it for my own sake. And I resolved, I've got to change that. I have got to get real about a spiritual life. And so for 9 months, I got up every morning and read the scriptures. I prayed. I sang some songs, and just really, really drew close to the Lord. And as I was reading scriptures, all these questions popped up, but I just pushed them aside. Nope, I'm going to be a committed Christian. And I'm sorry to admit this, but after 9 months, I felt like a hypocrite. I could no longer do it. My mind is a critical mind. I normally think these questions, Old Testament, New Testament. And after 9 months, I decided this is it. And so that was my second time turning away from, it was my second time turning back to the faith when I was 14, 15, and my dad died. I had turned back to the faith. I had turned back to the faith this time, and then I told myself, this is it. I'm out of here. So in 2000, I think it's in the year 2019. I'd have to look at my notes, but in 2019, we quit coming to church. And we did not do any giving. We did not do any praying. We didn't do any Bible study. And my friends, and my students and all that, people prayed for me. And the church was amazing. No one attacked me. No one said, we got to sit down, John, let's arm wrestle this. But people said, we're praying for you. We love you. We miss you. So, no more church in my life. The second time that I had come back to the Lord, I had quit again. So this is my third time saying no to God. I get lost in all these adventures, but that was my third time saying no to God. Once when I was 14, 15, once when I had my doctoral work and all that in 2014. So by say 2019, I couldn't take it anymore. I quit church for the third time. Well, at that time, my wife Marie developed a speech problem, and I said, "Honey, do you realize you're stuttering? You're slurring your words." So she said, "Yeah, I've kind of noticed." So we went to Dr. Biven, and he ordered some tests. And then more tests, specialized tests. And as it turned out, she had ALS. ALS is a horrible disease. It's a crippling disease. For 90% of the people, it starts in the feet. And they start falling over their feet and have eventually wind up in a wheelchair. And then it slowly progresses upward until their lungs no longer function. But in 10% of the people, it's called bulbar ALS. And it starts at the top. And the first thing affected is the speech. And that's what Marie had. The average lifespan for regular ALS is 5 years. The average lifespan for bulbar ALS is 24 months. And so that's what Marie had. And it didn't take long, or she no longer could eat and swallow. The mechanism didn't work. And so I'm just rejecting something I'm not going to share here, too personal. We decided that she would have a stomach pump. And what they do is they put a line directly into your stomach, and you just squeeze food in, fluid, not food. It's food, but it's fluid. And I did that. I was her personal nurse. We did not have anyone else helping us. Usually, ALS people have other people coming in and doing chores and taking care. My wife and I decided that I would be her caregiver. So I was her caregiver 2020, 2019, 2020. Um, washed her, and she got to where she would fall, and I couldn't pick her up. It hurt her for me to pick her up, so that was a hard ordeal. But eventually, she it came to. I remember the morning well. We didn't expect it would happen that morning, but she passed away. The ALS got to her, and fortunately, there was an attending nurse who had decided she just wanted to come by and visit, and she was there, so she saw the whole process, and Marie had died. Um, it wasn't long after that um, that I remembered something. I'd had two experiences that all of a sudden connected. I had gotten a prayer request from a friend of mine, Dan Clymer, who was a teacher in the college, and his wife Linda had a brain tumor, and he asked for prayers. And the same day, I had gotten a prayer request from another professor, Chuck Sackett, and he was asking for prayers. He also had some kind of a serious health problem. And of course, I didn't pray, but I noticed and said, well, I wish you well. But as I sat down and read those, all of a sudden something came to me. I remember that when I was in the basement in our shower washing Marie's feet, on my knees, washing her feet, I remembered the statue that we had in front of Lincoln Christian College. Jesus washing Peter's feet. And at that time, I remember thinking, how's that possible? You know, he's Lord. Who would make up a story like that he's washing a disciple's feet? And something hit me, that's not made up. The other experience that came to mind as I had those prayer requests there was when I was taking care of Marie, I had about 100 choice books that I wanted to read. That was my private little library at home. And I was going to read them in my retirement, but I didn't have time for it. Marie took up all my time. And so I had taken them to Forsyth. There's a used bookstore there in Forsyth who knew me well, and they took all my books that I turned in. I just turned all 100 books in. And Philippians 2 came to mind, where it says that Jesus was fully God, and he emptied himself like I emptied my library. And he did that for me. And guys, I can't explain it. I'm just sharing with you what happened. But just like Peter walking on the water, just like that gratitude when God pulled me through that double bypass surgery, I was overwhelmed with the reality of Jesus Christ. You don't make up stories like this. And he emptied himself, taking on the form of a servant, even unto death. And God raised him up. And I, once again, gave my heart to the Lord right there and then. I immediately got those two prayer requests and prayed. And I sobbed like a little girl. It was really a wonderful, wonderful time. And by that time, but unrelated to this, I had made friends. A lady had made friends with me here in the church, Karen Hargis, and I knew who she was, but I didn't know anything about her. But we'd become friends, and when I talked to her about turning to the Lord, that opened the door for us to see each other in a different light, because she never was going to have any, she could be friends with me. She respected me as a former professor, but there was nothing else there. But we fell in love. Now, as of today, February 6th, I proposed to her 3 years ago, and March of this will be our third wedding anniversary. So God has been, and she's a fantastic Christian woman. She has wisdom. She has more wisdom in her finger than I. I don't have much wisdom. I have a lot of knowledge, but not much wisdom. But she is just a great Christian lady. And we are such a good partners. We do a lot of calling together. We taught a Sunday school class together, and now because of my medication and my mental problems, my memory problems, I've given up the class. But all that to share, God has been exceedingly good to me. 3 different times, bringing me back when I was the prodigal son, went away. I didn't wallow in sexual slop at all. Well, pornography was an issue. I did not wallow in sexual issues, but I wallowed in intellectual issues, in doubts and in questions and in struggles. And each time the Lord brought me back, and now my heart is in it. Before it was all intellectual, but now my heart is in it. So I'm going to end with something, and if you don't mind, I'm going to read it to you like the Boatman article has it in the Standard. And then if you guys have any questions, we'll wrap this up. I'll be glad to try to answer. Paul asked me at the end of the interview for the Christian Standard, can you summarize your complex spiritual trek, first away from the faith and the church, and then to being a deeply committed believer? What happened to you? Good question. So here's my answer. When we become believers, we accept the invitation to dare to believe. Hold on to that thought. Dare to believe. Step out on the water. Believers trust the good news of God's forgiveness and new life in Jesus Christ. Believers repent of their sinful lifestyle. Believers are immersed into the body of Christ and obey the Spirit of Christ within. However, in our modern world, educated believers, like someone like me, who are exposed to critical thinking about the Bible, not just devotional thinking, but critical thinking, they are confronted with a different, widespread, powerful command, and that command is dare to know. And anyone who's hearing this, who's had any classes in philosophy, knows that that's a very important phrase in Western philosophy. Dare to know, sapere aude in Latin. Immanuel Kant, the extremely influential 18th century German philosopher, urged modern people to grow up intellectually, to dare to question and doubt traditional authorities like the Bible. And that's what Immanuel Kant was about. He was one of the most scholarly men that has lived in since the 20th centuries, since Christ. But dare to know, and don't just stay children. The Bible tells me so. How do I know the Bible tells me so? But dare to know, do science, investigate. Due to my very strict upbringing in the church, I understood my conservative faith to be telling me the opposite. And this is the third position. One is dare to believe. One is dare to know. And from my upbringing in the conservatism of my parents, I felt like my command in my life was don't dare to know. Don't go there. If you go there, you're going to lose your faith. You're going to wind up an apostate. You're going to burn in hell. Don't dare to know. So one is dare to believe. The modern world via everything, eventually via AI here, I believe, the modern world is telling us, dare to know. And many conservative, Bible believing, devotional, traditional Christians, their response to themselves and their kids are, don't dare to know. You know, don't read that book. Don't hear that speaker. Don't watch that program. Therefore, I felt my integrity in facing critical questions demanded that I leave the church. My integrity in facing critical questions that I didn't see many others facing demanded that I leave the church and a faith that insisted on the traditional literal interpretation of an inerrant revelation. And here's this conclusion. By God's amazing grace, I now know that the opposite to dare to know, and that's what I call the modern mind, is not don't dare to know, and I call that the pre-modern mind or the anti-modern mind. The modern mind is, the pre-modern mind is dare to believe. Dare to know is the modern mind. Don't dare to know is the anti-modern mind. But there is the possibility, and I hope I'm not making this too complex here, but there is the possibility of dare to not know. Dare to say, I don't know, but I believe. I hope, I trust. So I think a lot of our children and a lot of our grandchildren who are wrestling with the church and the faith, and when they go off to the university, they're challenged. Dare to know. Question your parents' faith and what you heard in youth group and in Sunday school. Dare to know. Well, the response is not, don't dare to know. Whoa, hands off, run away. No, a good response is, dare to admit, I don't know. You're right. I don't know, but I believe, I trust. I know whom I have believed. And am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I've committed unto him against that day. This means that we must dare to humbly acknowledge that we are not God, and that there are many things God alone knows that we will not and cannot know while living in a fallen creation. And Paul responded to my summary, those 4 different positions. His response was, welcome home, brother.
Praise God. What another great testimony. Watch another video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. My name is Caleb Hurley. This is The Jesus Shift. God bless and have a great rest of your day.